Lord, I am so tired.
Luis,
Have you ever considered that maybe, just maybe, the thoughts you hide, the ones you never say out loud, are being shouted in the courts of heaven? What if the softest, most exhausted whisper of your soul, never even formed on your lips, was heard clearer than any sermon? That idea used to sound foolish to me until the day I collapsed and Jesus spoke my name. Not because I had prayed with perfect words, but because I had thought of Him with my last drop of strength. My name is Luis Evangelista. I am a Filipino IT technician working under contract in Des Moines, Iowa. I live alone in a modest room behind a gas station, sending most of my salary back to my aging parents in Davao. My life is what people call quiet. No noise, no drama, no real connections. Just broken computers, long bus rides, and silent dinners. But what no one saw was how loudly I was screaming on the inside. Like many Filipinos working abroad, I wore my smile like armor. We are good at that, aren't we? Mabait, they say. Tiwala lang kay Lord. But some nights, I would lie in bed with my chest pounding and a silence so heavy I felt like I was sinking. I used to wonder, if I don't speak it, if I don't cry out loud, does God still care? Does He even hear? Or am I just another OFW fading into the crowd? Unheard, unseen, forgotten. See, I was raised in a small church in Davao, where prayer was loud, passionate, intense. The louder your cry, the closer God comes, they used to say. But I wasn't like that. I tried to shout, but my throat betrayed me. I tried to weep, but my tears ran dry. Eventually, all I had were silent thoughts, like Lord help me, or Jesus, I'm tired. And then came the guilt, the fear that I was a bad Christian, a weak believer, just because I couldn't pray right. One day, after a particularly draining Monday, I sat alone at the bus stop. Cold wind biting my face, mind full of failures. I looked at the darkening sky and thought nothing more. Just thought, Lord, I'm so tired. That's all. No hands lifted, no lips moved, just one quiet thought. But in that moment, something happened. Heaven moved. I didn't see stars fall or hear thunder, but I felt something in my chest snap, a thread giving way, and then silence. A different kind of silence, holy, still sacred. As my head leaned gently against the concrete wall, my breath slowed. The world faded, and in that vanishing light, I heard a voice call my name. Not from around me, but from within every part of me.
Lewis.
That single word, it broke me. Not because it was loud, but because it was filled with recognition. I was known, seen, understood. Jesus did not wait for my perfect prayer. He responded to my most unspoken cry. That was the beginning of the encounter that changed my life. And it all started with a thought. So, I ask you, kaibigan, how many times have you thought of God and believed it wasn't enough? What if every silent cry, every mental whisper, every quiet gasp in the middle of traffic, or dishes, or depression was a sacred offering? What if even in your weakest moment, He was already listening? Because what I learned beyond that veil, what Jesus Himself revealed to me, is something that will shake how you pray forever. Before that day, my life felt like with one long echo in an empty hallway. I didn't cause problems. I didn't make noise. I just existed. A brown skinned technician in a mostly white high school in Iowa. Another quiet worker with a badge and a tired smile. I lived in the shadows, and I thought that's all I would ever be. My name is Luis Evangelista, and if you saw me on the street, you wouldn't remember me. I blended in, faded out, disappeared between morning commutes and vending machine lunches. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. each day to catch the first bus, brushed my teeth with half-frozen water, skipped breakfast to save a few dollars, and sat in the back of a crowded school bus filled with teenagers staring at screens. I worked in the school's computer lab, fixing mouse pads, rebooting ancient desktops, wiping spilled juice off keyboards. I was invisible unless something broke. Then suddenly I was blamed, questioned, rushed, pressured. I never raised my voice. I always said, "Yes, ma'am," and "Sorry, sir," because that's what Filipinos do abroad. We endure, we adjust, we serve. But inside me was a storm I couldn't silence. Most people didn't know I suffered from anxiety since I was 15. Not the cute kind of nervousness before a test, but the kind that sat on your chest like a sack of bricks. My hands would tremble during meetings. My heart would race at the smallest comment. Sometimes I'd stare at a blinking cursor on a frozen computer screen and suddenly feel like I was about to pass out. But I smiled through it. Okay lang ako. I'd tell my coworkers. Kaya pa. I'd whisper on the bus. Even when I wasn't sure I could make it home without falling apart. I lived in a tiny rental behind a gas station. One window, one bed, and a fridge that barely worked. My table was covered with bills. Water, electricity, remittance fees for money I sent to my parents in Davao. My mother had diabetes. My father couldn't work anymore. They didn't know how thin the line was between my paycheck and complete collapse. Sometimes, after a long day, I would sit in the dark with only the hum of the old fan and whisper in my mind, "Lord, help me." Not with passion or loud emotion, just a thought. Tired, breathless, unspoken. And then, guilt would flood in. Why can't I pray like I used to? Why do my prayers feel so lazy, so broken? Why do I feel like a fake Christian just because I don't cry during worship anymore? I used to think maybe God had favorites, and I wasn't one of them. You see, when I was a teenager back home, I was active in church. I played guitar in youth service, prayed out loud during altar calls, and cried during Sunday sermons. I believed God moved through fire and thunder, through voices that shook the heavens. But somewhere along the way, life got harder and louder and more complicated. I stopped playing guitar. I stopped going to midweek services. I stopped praying out loud. Not because I didn't love God, but because I didn't have the strength. My prayers became thoughts, short, breathless thoughts. The kind you say in your head while fixing a cable or waiting for the bus. I'd think, Jesus, please give me strength, or Lord, help me get through this day. But after those thoughts, a wave of guilt would follow. Was that even a real prayer? I didn't kneel. I didn't shout. I didn't even open my mouth. There was one night. I remember it clearly. I had skipped dinner because my money was running low. I lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, my stomach aching, my chest heavier than usual. And I thought, Jesus, if you still hear me, please stay with me tonight. No reply came, no vision, no peace, just more silence. And so I assumed once again that my little thought prayer was too small to reach heaven. I didn't know then that God had heard every one of them.
Louis, even the thoughts you were too tired to finish, I heard them. I held them.
I didn't know that heaven didn't need volume or poetry or perfect words.
I never asked for a performance. I asked for your heart.
But I didn't know that yet. At that time, I just believed I was spiritually failing. That maybe my faith had expired somewhere between homesickness and overdue rent. I would ride the bus home and stare out the window, watching people laugh walk live. And I would think, Lord, do you still see me? Then I'd feel ashamed for even thinking that, like I was doubting Him, like I was sinning silently. That was the burden I carried daily. The shame of silence. The fear that God had stopped listening. All because I had stopped speaking. And that fear, that spiritual ache, followed me every day until the day I thought I died. It happened on a Monday. The kind of day that doesn't try to destroy you all at once, just slowly chips away until you've got nothing left. I had barely slept the night before, head full of numbers bills and distant worries I couldn't solve. My chest was tight when I woke up, but I pushed through, again, like I always did. The school was unusually loud that day. A student spilled orange juice into a keyboard first thing in the morning. 2 machines refused to boot up. A teacher accused the projector of eating her lesson plan and looked at me like I had committed a crime. I apologized, even though I didn't do anything wrong. Again, by lunch, I had reheated the same bitter cup of instant coffee for the 3rd time. I skipped the cafeteria to avoid small talk. I sat behind the lab's storage cabinet, scrolling through my bank app, and realizing I had just enough left for rent. If nothing else broke this week, I remember thinking, how long can I survive like this? Not out loud, just in my head. It was a dangerous kind of tired. The kind that doesn't make you cry, just makes you numb. When the bell rang and the school emptied out, I did my usual final checks. Turned off the main server, locked up the lab, walked out with my backpack slung low. The wind outside was colder than usual for spring. Iowa always finds a way to surprise you with weather. I made my way to the bus stop just a few blocks down and sat on the concrete bench beside the pharmacy wall. The sky above was gold, bleeding into purple. Beautiful, but I barely noticed. I leaned my head back, closed my eyes for a moment, tried to breathe. My thoughts were swirling. My mom's medicine. Refill the broken refrigerator. My cousin messaging me for emergency help again. My guilt for not calling home yesterday. And then, somewhere in the fog of that exhaustion, a simple thought floated up. Lord, I'm tired. I'm really tired. I didn't say it. Didn't whisper it. Didn't move my lips. It was just a flicker in my mind. A silent sentence in a mental storm. But in the very next moment, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no light from the sky, no angel, no thunder, just a quiet letting go. Like something inside me had snapped gently, like a thread cut loose. My body leaned sideways, slow and soft, like someone falling asleep at their desk. My shoulder hit the side of the bench. My vision blurred. Sounds around me stretched into silence. The world faded like a dream you forget as you wake. But I wasn't waking. I was leaving. There was no fear, no pain, just stillness. Sacred, weightless stillness. I thought I was dying. But I didn't feel like I was dying. I felt like I was being carried, drawn into a presence I couldn't name yet. I wasn't floating or flying. I was just somewhere else, where time had no clock. And peace wasn't a concept, it was the air. At first, there was nothing. No ceiling, no sky, no ground. Just soft, warm light. And silence that felt alive. Not empty, not lonely, but holy. Then I became aware of a presence, not approaching from a direction, but surrounding me, knowing me. I didn't see him with my eyes, but my soul recognized him instantly. I heard my name.
Louis.
It didn't echo. It wasn't loud, but it went through every layer of who I was, as if it had been waiting to be spoken all my life. I wanted to cry, and I did, not out of fear, not even from shame, but from the sheer beauty of being truly known. The kind of knowing that doesn't flinch when it sees your ugliest thoughts. The kind that says, I see everything, and I still call you by name. He didn't ask me why I had stopped praying out loud. He didn't accuse me of being weak or lazy. He didn't ask why I let my faith grow quiet.
You thought I was silent, Louis, but I was listening to every word your heart never dared to say.
I wanted to explain myself, to apologize, to say I meant to do better. But before I could, he stepped closer, not with his feet, but with his love, and placed his hand over his heart.
I heard every thought, even the ones you never dared to write down, every sigh, every mental whisper. I held them all.
There was no condemnation, just compassion. No disappointment, just deep, unwavering understanding.
Even your smallest thought of me was a prayer. Even your breathless moments of desperation, I treasured them.
In that moment, I realized something that broke every wall of guilt I had built over the years. He had been there the whole time, not waiting for perfect words, not measuring the volume of my voice, but simply listening to the direction of my heart. And he had heard me. That Monday, at the bus stop, when I thought no one did. I don't know how long I stood in that light. There was no time, no ticking, just a steady warmth wrapping around me like a blanket I had needed my whole life. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of something I couldn't explain. Like every burden I'd ever carried had evaporated. Like the noise in my mind, the constant self-criticism, the doubt, the guilt had been silenced by someone else's voice.
Louis,
It wasn't just a name being called. It was an awakening. My whole being trembled, not with fear, but with recognition. My soul knew that voice. It wasn't the first time I had heard him. It was just the first time I realized he had been speaking all along. I turned, not with my body, but with something deeper. And there he was. I didn't see him with my eyes, but I saw him. Not in the way we see a person's face, but in the way you feel the sun when it touches your skin. The love that radiated from him wasn't casual, it was consuming. It filled every part of me that had ever felt, overlooked, forgotten, or unseen. His presence was familiar, like coming home to someone you didn't even realize you missed. I fell to my knees. Though I wasn't sure I had knees in that place, I just knew I was lower. And he was before me, glorious and yet so close, so reachable, so safe. I expected a holy confrontation. I expected him to ask, "Why did you stop praying with passion?" Or, "Why did you let your faith grow quiet?" But he didn't say anything for a while. He just looked at me. And in that gaze, years of shame, unspoken anxiety, and hidden sorrow melted.
I saw every time you thought I didn't.
I began to cry. Not the loud shaking kind, but the deep kind. The kind that comes from a place even you didn't know existed. I had carried so many things in silence, and now all of them were being seen without judgment, without rejection.
You never had to earn my attention. Louis, I've been listening since the first time you whispered my name in your mind.
He reached out, his hand not just to comfort, but to reveal something. And in a moment, like a breath between dimensions, a kind of window appeared beside us. It hovered midair, transparent, glowing alive. It didn't open into a place, but into something even more eternal, time itself. Frame by frame, moments from my life began to unfold. Not dramatic ones, not public ones, but the quiet ones. First, I saw myself in the school cafeteria, sitting alone after a chaotic day, my shoulders slouched, my fingers gripping a cold cup of coffee. I remembered that day. Clearly nothing had gone right. I was exhausted. And as I sat there, I thought just a thought. nothing more. God, give me strength. That's it. No voice, no movement. Just one sentence in my head while kids screamed down the hall. But then, Jesus standing beside me pointed at that exact moment.
Heaven heard this as a cry.
I gasped. He said it with such honor, as if that tiny thought had been something sacred, something treasured. I had forgotten it, but he hadn't. He remembered it like someone who keeps love letters in a box, under their bed, read over and over again.
I held on to it, Louis. I never forgot.
The window shifted again. I saw myself lying in bed one night, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, my chest heavy. I wasn't moving, wasn't praying, but in my mind I repeated softly, again and again, Jesus, stay with me. Please stay. And then he turned to me again, eyes full of fire and compassion.
I held your spirit that night, even when you thought you were alone.
I broke. Tears flowed uncontrollably. Because I remembered that night. I had cried myself to sleep, thinking God had left me. But now I knew he never had. The visions continued. More scenes appeared. I saw myself on a bus, staring blankly out the window, tears burning behind my eyes, thinking, Lord, do you still see me? I saw a man, stranger to me, sitting in a dirty restroom, head against the tile wall, thinking, does God still care about someone like me? I saw a small boy in the crowded shelter, pulling a thin blanket over himself, whispering in his heart, God, do you hear me? Jesus looked at me, not as a king over a servant, but as a friend, and spoke words I will never forget.
They believed they were merely thinking, but to heaven that was indeed prayer, and prayer made in truth is never ignored.
Then something even more astonishing happened. Another layer of this vision unfolded, and I saw angels, tall, glowing, gentle beings, moving through these moments, collecting the silent prayers of people like perfumes, like sacred offerings. I saw golden jars being filled with thoughts, sighs, silent weeping, whispers that never made it to lips, but made it all the way to the throne of heaven. And then, Jesus said something that shattered every lie I had ever believed.
You thought you were weak, Louis, but I saw a warrior. Every time you chose to think of me instead of sinking into despair, you won a victory, and I celebrated each one.
My knees gave way. My soul felt like it was kneeling 1,000 times deeper. Because for the first time, I understood. Heaven is not moved by volume, it's moved by sincerity. And in that sacred space, with Jesus beside me, I realized I had never been silent. I had just been speaking in the language heaven understands best, the language of the heart. The light surrounding us grew softer, as if it responded to the weight of what Jesus had just revealed. My soul was still trembling, still trying to grasp the magnitude of what I had seen. But then, something changed again. The window hovering beside us didn't disappear. It expanded. And the visions it showed no longer belonged just to me. I saw others, many others, people of every age, every color, every background. And yet, each one was doing the same thing. sitting alone, walking quietly, lying in bed, or staring out a window, saying nothing. And yet, everything. There was a mother in a crowded kitchen, her hands soaked in dishwater, her back aching, her baby crying in the next room. She was scrubbing a plate, her eyes distant, and in her heart, she said without words, Jesus, I need strength. Then I saw a college student pacing back and forth in a tiny dorm room. Books open, eyes wide, chest tight. His mind repeated silently, Lord, help me focus. Please, don't let me fail again. Then I saw a man in Manila traffic. One hand gripping the wheel, the other clenched in his lap, sweat running down his temple, and in his chest a thought so simple, but so heavy. God hold me together. None of them said a word out loud. None of them lifted their hands. But Jesus turned to me and nodded slowly.
They are not just surviving, they are winning. Every true thought directed at me is a prayer, even if it lacks sound form or eloquence.
Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness, but from revelation. All this time, I had believed that words were required for heaven to listen. I had believed that silence was a failure, a spiritual weakness. But here was Jesus showing me that heaven had been tuned in to the unspoken cries of humanity all along.
They think I only respond to fire, to shouts, to scripts, but I respond to truth, even if that truth is just a whisper in the mind.
The scene shifted again. This time, I saw angels, more than I could count, moving through the earth, gently collecting things I didn't expect to be sacred sabkat, silent prayers, unfinished thoughts, even tears that had not fallen. They held golden jars glowing with light, and in those jars were what looked like fragrances. I watched as one angel gently hovered beside a girl in a hospital bed who had lost her hair to chemotherapy. She wasn't praying out loud, but in her mind, she thought, Lord, don't let me be afraid. That thought, unspoken, almost too weak to register, was lifted by the angel into the jar, and as it entered the jar, shone brighter.
Every mental whisper from a heart turned toward me is gathered, preserved, cherished.
Then I saw something even more overwhelming. The golden jars were being brought into a vast place, a heavenly space so holy I could barely comprehend it. And there these jars were placed before the throne of God Himself. The prayers that never made it past the lips of humans were offered as incense before the Creator.
What they thought were weak thoughts are to me songs of warfare and worship.
My heart was undone because suddenly I realized the times I sat in the bus, staring into nothingness, the moments I stood in the computer lab, gripping the desk and thinking, please Lord, not today. The nights I lay in bed, too tired to even whisper His name. Those were not forgotten. They were remembered. Jesus then lifted His hand again, and in the air appeared a scripture, alive, pulsing, written in light.
Bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ.
2 Corinthians 10:5. He looked at me again, His gaze cutting through every lie I had believed.
Lewis, you thought you were just thinking, but every time you turned your thoughts to me, even for a second, you were standing in battle. and I stood beside you in every one.
I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Because in that moment, I realized how I had underestimated my own faith. I had judged myself by volume, by energy, by passion. But Jesus had been measuring me by truth, sincerity, and endurance.
You gave me all you had, even when all you had was a breath, a thought, a tear held back. I received it as a full prayer.
The weight of that truth was too much to bear. But it didn't crush me. It healed me. My entire life, I had been taught that real prayer was long, loud, structured. But here in this sacred place, Jesus was teaching me that even a breath can reach heaven if it's pointed toward Him. I bowed again, not because I had to, but because awe demanded it. Jesus reached out and touched my shoulder gently.
Remember this, Luis? I was never waiting for you to say enough. I was always waiting for you to look my way, even for a moment.
That moment will never leave me. Because now I knew. Prayer is not a performance. It's proximity. And I had been closer to Him in my silence than I ever imagined. After showing me the silent prayers of the world, Jesus turned to me again, and His expression grew deeper. Not sorrowful, but intentional. As if what I was about to see next required not just my eyes, but my heart, my honesty.
Luis, you've seen what prayer looks like from heaven's view. Now I want to show you where the fiercest battles have been fought.
With that, the scenery around us shifted. We were no longer standing in light. Instead, we entered a space that felt both vast and enclosed, like the inside of someone's soul. And somehow, I knew. This wasn't just anyone's mind. It was mine. Thoughts floated around us, not like words, but like pulses of emotion, floating images, phrases, feelings. They didn't make sound, but they vibrated with weight. I saw memories, some recent, some decades old, swirling around like smoke inside this realm. There were moments I had forgotten, moments I had buried. That night, I sat in the dark, after my visa was delayed again, whispering in my heart, maybe I'm cursed. The time I skipped a church for 3 straight Sundays, because I felt too numb to worship. The quiet moments, I thought God probably listens to stronger people than me. These thoughts hovered like shadows, cold, condemning. And then came the voices. Not external voices, but internal whispers that had haunted me for years. You're not spiritual enough. You don't know how to pray. Your faith is weak. God doesn't hear lazy thoughts. You're failing at being a believer. I stood frozen. These weren't memories. They were accusations. And even though no one else had ever said them to me, I realized how often I had said them to myself. Jesus looked at me with eyes that saw through everything.
Those voices were never from me. I never called you a failure. I never measured your faith by your volume.
And then He raised His hand, and a beam of light pierced the space, separating the swirling accusations from the quiet, sincere thoughts that had come from my spirit. I saw the difference instantly. On one side were thoughts laced with shame, fear, and self-hate. They hissed like smoke, curling around my memories like poison. On the other side were the real prayers, short, broken, but pure. Lord, I don't know what to do, Jesus, be near. Please don't let go of me. God, I miss you. I'm trying. I really am. Jesus stepped between them, and with every step, he took the toxic voices retreated, silenced not by force, but by truth.
The enemy whispers in the language of shame, but I speak in the language of love.
Suddenly, I saw others again. A young man sitting in a restroom stall, holding his breath, so no one hears him cry, thinking, Lord, please, help me, not give up. A teenage girl at a church service staring at her shoes while everyone else sings, thinking, I want to feel you again, but I don't know how. An old man alone in a small home in Cebu, sitting with a photo of his late wife, silently thinking, I miss you both. Lord, take care of her and me. And then Jesus said something that broke something deep inside of me.
These are not just thoughts. These are warrior prayers. These are people who refuse to let go even in the silence. They are still fighting, and that is worship.
The air shifted again, and now I could see what happens when a believer thinks of God in the midst of mental chaos. It was like a shield would form around their mind, an invisible force of protection. And I saw arrows trying to pierce them, guilt, doubt, fear, distraction. But each time someone whispered, Jesus in their thoughts, the arrow shattered.
Every mental turn toward me is warfare. Every time you think of me in the middle of noise, you're choosing victory.
I saw how often I had been in battle and didn't even know it. Every morning, I stood at the bus stop, feeling hollow, but still whispered in my mind, Lord, just be with me today. Every time I walked past churches in silence, wishing I had the courage to go back in. Every time I felt unworthy, but still dared to think, Jesus, don't leave me. Those were victories. And Jesus celebrated every one.
You never celebrated those moments? But I did. Every thought of me is a step toward me.
In that realm of thoughts, I no longer felt ashamed for being quiet. I no longer felt less than those who prayed louder or cried more. Because now I knew prayer doesn't begin with words. It begins with direction. And every time I directed my thoughts toward Him, even without knowing, I had been drawing closer to the heart of heaven. Jesus reached out His hand, again, lifting my chin gently with His light-filled fingers.
Louis, you don't need perfect language to reach me. You just need to remember who you are and who I am.
That was when I understood. I had never stopped praying. I had just been praying in the quietest, rawest, most human way possible. Through thoughts, through breath, through endurance. And Jesus had heard every single one. The air around us began to change again. The realm of thoughts, with its swirling memories and silent battles, slowly faded into light. Not darkness, not absence, just light. Like the beginning of a new morning that hadn't arrived yet. And then I saw it. At the center of this glowing clearing was something so beautiful, so alive, that I couldn't even describe it fully if I tried. It looked like a portal made of light. Not a door, not a tunnel, but a living presence of rest, peace, home. It shimmered gently like sunlight dancing on calm water. It pulsed not with power, but with invitation. It didn't frighten me. It welcomed me. There was no sense of pressure, no force telling me what I must do, only stillness and choice. Jesus stepped beside me again, his presence still overwhelming in kindness and clarity. He lifted his hand and pointed to the light.
You may rest here, Lewis, or you may return.
I looked at the portal, and everything inside me ached to stay. How could I return to a life of unpaid bills, broken machines, and sleepless nights after being in this? Here there was no anxiety, no weight, no cold wind, just radiance, just Him. But Jesus didn't rush me. He simply stood beside me, like a friend, not a judge, not a ruler, just someone who knew every tear I had ever held back and loved me anyway. The silence hung for a moment, like the whole universe was waiting, breathing. And then slowly, Jesus stepped a little closer and spoke again, this time with the deeper gravity in his voice.
But if you return, Lewis, you do not return empty-handed. You accept a mission.
Something inside me shifted. My soul leaned forward even though my body didn't move. And without words, I gave him permission to continue.
Go back and tell my children that I hear them. Tell them that when they believe, they are merely thinking I am already present. Tell them that when their hearts reach for me in silence, heaven is already listening.
His words cut into me, not like a knife, but like sunlight through clouds that had covered my life for far too long.
They think their prayers must be loud, but I hear the ones that are barely born. They think I need perfect words, but I am moved by broken honesty. They think they need to earn my ear, but I've been listening since their first breath.
I stood there, completely undone. I thought about the people I knew, Filipinos working abroad, mothers raising kids alone, students under pressure, men quietly fighting addiction, women smiling through hidden depression. And I realized so many of us carry our faith like a burden, trying so hard to pray right, to worship correctly, to say the right words. But what Jesus was showing me was completely different. He doesn't wait for perfection. He responds to sincerity. Then he said something that felt like a final note on a scroll written by the hand of God.
The Spirit Himself intercedes for you, with groanings too deep for words.
I remembered that scripture. I had read it once during a youth retreat years ago. But no, it burned inside of me like a revelation too holy to ignore.
Remind them, Lewis, that they are never too quiet for me. Remind them that even their mental glances toward heaven shake the atmosphere. Remind them that I am not a God who hides.
Then he smiled, not the kind of smile you give out of politeness, but a smile of deep understanding, of recognition, of love.
I was never waiting for them to perform well. I was always waiting for them to come.
The light around us began to swell, not like an explosion, but like a rising tide. The clearing filled with glory. And I realized I was not being left behind. I was being trusted to go back. As the space between heaven and earth began to blur, I heard his final instruction.
Go, Lewis. Help my people understand. They don't have to be silent, not even in their thoughts, because I am the God who listens to the heart.
And with that, the tide pulled me gently backward, like being carried in a river made of peace. My spirit began to reconnect with my body. The light dimmed. The weight of the earthly world returned slowly. I heard the rush of wheels, voices calling my name, a siren in the background. And then someone leaned over me and shouted, "Luis, Luis, stay with us. You're gonna be okay." I blinked. Tears slipped from my eyes, not from pain, but from the unbearable beauty of what I had just experienced. The blur of heaven faded slowly, like petals falling in reverse, light dissolving into time. I felt my breath returning, not like a gasp, but like an echo coming home. My body was cold, my chest ached, my eyes opened to the sterile white of an ambulance ceiling. A paramedic leaned over me, voice sharp but kind. "Luis, you're back with us. You fainted at the bus stop. Just hang in there. Okay?" I blinked slowly, not because I didn't understand him, but because my spirit was still holding on to eternity. My tear slid from the corner of my eye. Not from fear, not from pain, but from awe. I had just left the safest place I had ever known. Not because I was pushed out, but because I was sent back, with a mission branded into my soul. The doctors later told me it was a collapse due to stress and undetected heart fatigue. They said it was a miracle someone found you in time. But I knew better. It wasn't a miracle of chance, it was grace with purpose. I stayed a few nights in the hospital. The monitors beeped beside me, but my mind wasn't in Des Moines anymore. It kept replaying that moment, that voice.
Tell my children that I hear them. Even their thoughts are sacred to me.
When I was finally discharged, I returned to my tiny rental room behind the gas station. But everything looked different. Not because the walls had changed, but because my spirit had. That first night, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling. The same cracked ceiling that once made me feel suffocated. But now, it looked like a canvas where heaven had written my name. I didn't speak. I didn't kneel. I simply thought, "Lord, I'm here." And then I wept, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being understood. The next morning, I did what I never had the courage to do before. I called my best friend back home in Davao, someone I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. His name was Carlo, a youth leader back in the day, someone who used to quote scripture more than jokes. I told him everything. There was a long silence on the other side of the line. And then I heard him sniff. "Luis," he said, "I needed to hear that. Because lately, I've only been praying in my head. And I felt like God stopped listening." That hit me deep. He believed the same lie I used to believe. Since then, I've started telling more people, quietly in private moments. Not because I'm trying to impress, but because I know there are millions out there, especially my fellow Filipinos, who walk through life silently screaming for help. And to all of them, I share what Jesus told me in the place of light.
Even before a word is on your tongue, I, the Lord, know it completely. When you think of me even for a moment, it shakes heaven. You are not failing, you are fighting, and I am celebrating every step toward me.
These days, my life isn't magical or perfect. I still fix broken projectors. I still ride crowded buses and drink reheated coffee that tastes like cardboard. I still miss home, but now I know I am not alone. Ever. Because I've learned the truth that religion often forgets. Heaven is not impressed by loud prayers. Heaven is moved by honest ones. Even the ones no one hears. Even the ones you're afraid to say. Even the ones you think don't count. I now pray everywhere. At the computer lab, while rebooting a student's desktop. On the bus, while looking out the window. In the middle of brushing my teeth, not with many words. Sometimes, just a thought. Sometimes, just a sigh. Sometimes, just a glance upward. And every time I know, He hears me.
Louis, I was never waiting for you to perform. I was always waiting for you to come.
That line still lives in my soul because now I understand. Prayer isn't about impressing heaven. It's about letting heaven in, especially through silence. To you reading this now, you may feel like your faith is too small, your words too broken. Your thoughts too chaotic. But let me tell you what Jesus told me on the other side.
There is no such thing as a small prayer when it comes from a sincere heart.
If all you can do today is think of Him for a second, do it. If all you have strength for is to whisper in your mind, do it. If your heart is tired and your voice won't come, just think of Him. And He'll come to you because you are not forgotten, because you are not too silent, because your thoughts are worship.